What's going on, basketball fans? It's Caleb Johnson here with you. It's Atlanta Basketball with Caleb Johnson, episode 5. We finally have some basketball to talk about. It's been, kind of exciting leading up to this of we had seen everything on paper. We knew what the potential could look like for the Atlanta Hawks, but actually getting to see it play out, even if it was in a preseason matchup, was still really nice because you could go all the way back to media day where Trae Young talked about, hey, on paper, this is the best team that I've ever played on. But then you talk to guys like Kristaps Porzingis, who's like, it's gonna take some time though. Got to work out all the kinks, got to figure out how teams are going to play us. And that's certainly something we're going to talk about over the course of this podcast, talking about who is in the starting lineup, who is not, what the rotations looked like. Are these the things that are going to show up, night one against the Toronto Raptors at State Farm Arena? I'm not necessarily sure, but I think we got some pretty strong signals of how guys are viewed, at least currently, where they stand on the roster, and who ultimately is going to end up making this final roster throughout this kind of this preseason period until we get to night one of the regular season. Now, a big thing coming into this Hawks Rockets preseason game number 1 is just simply figuring out who was going to be available, who was going to be able to play. And what was really nice is as I worked the Atlanta Hawks radio network along with Steve Holman, it was really cool to get to look at that injury report for the Hawks and say no one. I mean, there is no one currently, knock on wood, it's particle board, but should work the same. Uh, there is no one currently that is injured on this Atlanta Hawks team, which is drastically different than where things left off last season, where you were missing multiple bodies. And especially, having a big starter like Jalen Johnson out was a big part of that. Now, it feels like there are a lot of guys who have returned to this roster, but then there are a ton of new faces. I believe that's 8 new faces that the Hawks have added to this team, which doesn't necessarily seem crazy when you've got 18 overall players, but it's nearly half. And so a lot has stayed the same, especially when it comes to the starting lineup, but there have also been quite a few changes. And it was interesting to see how Quin Snyder decided to roll out all of those things last night. Of course, the Hawks did not have any injuries, but the Rockets were dealing with a couple of pretty big injuries, and then one guy who just decided he's in year 18, he wasn't going to play. Is the first I'll get into is Fred VanVleet. Fred was not available and won't be available this season for the Houston Rockets because he tore his ACL in an offseason workout. And so that was a pretty big loss to Houston, not only because they paid VanVleet a lot of money, season, 2 seasons ago, to be a big piece of this. And that's partly why they brought in Kevin Durant, but also because of how much money they have spent on players, that when you lose a Fred VanVleet, the NBA doesn't just come in and say, oh, okay, you get some salary relief. Like, no, that those hardship rules only come into play when you've lost multiple bodies. And so when you just lose a star in Fred VanVleet, a big piece of what you were hoping your team was going to be, you can't just easily replace that sort of guy. You've got to hope that, especially a second year player like Reed Shepherd, steps in and steps up for you, because financially you can't go and replace it. It's part of why, like, Houston was so up against the luxury tax, or that second apron. That is how the Hawks ended up with N'Faly Dante, because the Hawks looked at him and were like, okay, he's on a 2-way, he's on a cheap deal with the Rockets, but we could sign him to a full contract, and the Rockets can't match it because they don't have the money to do so, because everyone is afraid of essentially swallowing that poison pill that is the second apron in the luxury tax, because it just restricts you so much from what you can do. And you've seen teams like the Celtics who have entered in that and then had to have a yard sale, had to sell off all their pieces, all of their important assets, especially when you hit an injury like the Celtics did with Jason Tatum, because you can't do a whole lot to build. You're restricted. You're literally, getting a point where they're icing your first round pick in the future because of how much money you spend. It's part of this new CBA in making sure that everything is more fair. And it's really what it does is it prevents dynasties from happening. So things like the Golden State Warriors are just not going to happen very often, and even situations like the New York Knicks, who signed some guys like Mikal Bridges and Jalen Brunson to more team friendly deals. Still, they're going to be up against it very soon, I believe, as soon as next year. And so, for all of that, when you lose a big piece like a Fred Van Vliet, you can't immediately go and replace that guy. You've got to have someone like a Reed Shepherd and a Josh Okogie and the likes kind of step up in those guys' places and kind of play a different role from what they were expected to be in. And the Hawks are very familiar with that sort of a thing, because it's great when you have guys like Mo Gay step up and play above their level. It's great when Zachary Rizachet as a rookie has to step into the starting lineup because of injuries to DeAndre Hunter and the like. It's great when you have young players who are able to step up. However, when you're trying to contend, that's not really the time to be dealing with big injuries. So, essentially to kind of wrap that up and make a long story short, it's great that the Hawks don't have injuries right now, and hopefully they can hold off on that for as long as possible, because I think it would be a real travesty to have this team experience injuries and be prevented from seeing what this team could really potentially be. And now I know if you see the final score from Monday night, you're thinking, well, the potential is, they're a good bit significantly worse than the Houston Rockets and what the Houston Rockets are sending out there. Also, just as a side note, if you hear some random shrieks or squeals or things, I do have my dog in the room with me, which I thought she was going to be on her best behavior and everything was going to be fine. However, the more that I've started talking, the more that she is wanting to be involved in the conversation. So just, as a side note, no, I don't have a random person in my house, yelling. Uh, it's just my pup tail. All right. When it comes to last night, like I said, if you see the final score, you see, oh, okay, well, even the Rockets with their reserves were able to play significantly better than the Hawks, down the stretch, and what had them as big as a 15-point lead is I think what the largest lead was for the Rockets in this game. Might have been more than that. I'll be honest with you. One of the strangest things about last night, as someone who was on the call on the radio trying to, talk live as it happened, was the all of the stats for Monday night's game were absolutely chaotic. I mean, apart from the fact that the game initially was not on cable TV like it was supposed to be. So, as someone who was in our Atlanta studios trying to talk about the game, I was having to pull it up on my laptop on a stream, which was significantly behind where the game was live on the radio. Made things very interesting when it came to timeouts and trying to talk stats. So you might be, waking up and looking at things on Tuesday and see, oh, well, why does it say that Trae Young and Jalen Johnson played 40 minutes? No, that was not the case. Trae Young played, I believe, just over 18 minutes. Jalen Johnson, just over 16 minutes. But it's preseason for everyone. It's preseason for those of us on the air talking about the game. It's preseason for the officials. It's preseason for the players. It's preseason for the stats department, which means, a little clunky right now, but hopefully by the time the regular season begins, everything will, you know, have worked itself out. So one of the difficult things was just trying to figure out how big leads had gotten because the score that would get shown on TV was kind of like, is this accurate? I'm kept falling back on the score that my partner Steve Holman was giving me, because I was like, all right, he's in the arena, he is seeing the scoreboard, even when the stats are drastically different, and have the game being like 10 more points scored between the two teams than had actually been scored, and the clock was super different. And I know all of those are like little things that for most of you, you don't care about. Just tell me about what I was watching. It makes it interesting when you are calling a game, or at least I'm not doing the play-by-play. I'm just doing the timeouts, trying to give some score updates, some stats updates. Very difficult when those things aren't happening in real time, and the likes. But kind of listening to Steve Holman call the game while the game on TV is significantly behind, made it a bit difficult when it came to actually watching what we saw play out. But I still think there are some pretty key things that we can hit on and kind of talk through over the course of this podcast. Number one was who was going to start. Knowing that everyone was available for the Hawks, it was like, all right, do you use this as a first dress rehearsal for the regular season? Do you try something in this game and then decide, hey, maybe later on we do something different? I had spent some time in previous podcasts talking about what was going to happen with Onyeka Okongwu and Kristaps Porzingis, because when you go and trade for a Porzingis, he's obviously a guy who started in Boston and, spend a lot of time in that starting lineup. He's a big piece. That's why you bring him in. However, has the injury history. And so would the Hawks consider handling Kristaps Porzingis the way that they did DeAndre Hunter, where Quinn would speak about it's much easier to handle DeAndre's minutes when he's coming off the bench. He can also kind of get a feel for how the game is going and then jump right in and add his expertise. Would the Hawks do that? Because in the same respect, you had on MLK Day last year, Onyeka Okongwu earn the starting role for the Hawks. You know this, though, as well as I do. When you add new players, when you add talented players, you've got to completely reevaluate how you're managing your rotations, how you're managing your roster. And so the first sign that we got of this truly taking place was seeing Kristaps Porzingis in the starting lineup. I think it's not necessarily surprising that he earned this in this first preseason game. It was just to some extent telling, because I had wondered if you might start off with Onyeka Okongwu because he is more familiar with this roster, with playing with Trae Young. If maybe he earned it in some sort of respect way. However, it's clear, at least preseason game number one, that you know Quinn is going to attack this roster based on who is here, and this season is not last season. Everything is brand new. It's interesting. The Hawks have talked about as much that this season is not last season. They don't want to do a whole lot of comparing because they know the injuries and the disappointment of how the season ended, but it also comes in respect to your roster. And it was interesting how Trae Young and Kristaps Porzingis both spoke over the course of training camp, saying that, yeah, it was a lot easier um, to kind of find the feel of how Trae wants to play with Kristaps than maybe they expected it to be. Oh, well, I know that was the case for Kristaps. It felt like Trae knew, oh yeah, I have full confidence that I am gonna know where Kristaps wants the ball. Especially kind of playing, feeding Kristaps down low for those easy put ins and that sort of a thing. I think we saw some of that play out last night. It was interesting kind of how these lineups came together, because you were also playing the Houston Rockets, who I think very similar to like the Orlando Magic are a very tall team, and they like to throw a lot of big bodies at you. So because of that, we got to see something that was asked about at media day and played out right in front of our eyes. We got to see Kristaps Porzingis and Onyeka Okongwu playing next to each other, because when the Rockets send out Alfred Şengün and send out Steven Adams, that's a lot of big bodies that you got to deal with. And so how they decided to attack that is throwing their own bigs, because it's interesting. Like, this is the benefit of what the Hawks roster is right now. Not only are they much taller than I feel like they've ever been, and in fact, I saw something recently that average height wise, I believe they are the tallest team in the NBA, which is crazy to have Trae Young on the roster and for it to be like that. But and I don't have the list right in front of me. I have to imagine the Houston Rockets are like second or third probably in the NBA, because there is a ton of size outside of Reed Shepard that that the Rockets can throw at the Hawks, and they certainly did that. And then threw size at the Hawks in a way that I think they weren't necessarily expecting, but something that I have to imagine Quin Snyder, and we'll talk with him later in the week. I have to imagine Quinn is very thankful for Ime Udoka and the Rockets right out of the gate, throwing some curveballs to the Hawks. Things like having Alfred Şengün guarding Dyson Daniels on defense. It was something that clearly was an irritant to the Hawks, something that they were not expecting. In fact, I believe I saw a quote that Kevin Chouinard of Hawks.com put out there that it was essentially Dyson said as much. Yeah, didn't expect to have their big guarding me like that, but it's something they will now be able to take that tape and go work on and strategize and figure out. And like this is so good, guys. This is so good to be happening in a portion of the season where the games don't count. And even through the early part of the season, if the Hawks see more of these things that they didn't necessarily expect, you're not winning or losing a season based on your first couple weeks of play. You certainly want to get off to a good start, and I think that would be important for the Hawks to get off to somewhat of a quote unquote hot start. But like it's so good to run into these problems right now, because I think one part of the NBA that fans often do forget, and it is it's an excuse. Fans never want to hear excuses. Completely understand that, but it is a legitimate excuse, and it is something that Asa Newell, the rookie for the Hawks, actually spoke about during training camp. Is the amount of time this team has together is so short. Like, sure, they can get together in the summer to some extent, but there's only so much that they can do as they're all individually working on their games. They all also individually have lives that they want to spend and relax. Like I think it's interesting. We want uh, basketball players and athletes just in general to get better over the course of an off season, but you also they got to relax too. They've got to get some time off as well. For all of those reasons, the Hawks get about a week of training camp before of two-a-days essentially before they are playing this first preseason game. It is not a lot of time together. Asa Newell was like, man, at Georgia, we're doing all kinds of training sessions over the course of the entire summer. We're flipping tires, we're doing bonding trips and all this sort of thing. Very different from the college game to the pro game. And so these are just some things that are going to take time, but seeing the way that um, that the Rockets decided to send out a big like Şengün to guard Dyson Daniels was interesting. And I think it's something that Quinn will be able to go and work on and improve. I think it was also interesting to see just kind of how the rotations were ordered, how players kind of came out onto the floor. All 18 players for the Atlanta Hawks played Monday night against the Rockets. That does not always happen, especially for Quin Snyder in the past. There's been plenty of times in the preseason where you might have three guys who didn't touch the floor in a game, or maybe they came in like the final minute, 2 minutes of the game, which is really not enough run to make a true difference. I know there was still there were two players that came in with 3 minutes to play, which is not a ton, but I think it's more burn than you would typically see from Quin Snyder deploying his roster. But Quinn has talked about how deep he views this roster, and it's one of those things. It's one of those little nuggets that I've kind of tucked away as like, okay, you see your roster being pretty deep. Let's see how much you play this roster once the regular season starts. But we did see Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Onyeka Okongwu be the first two guys to come off the bench. It was interesting to kind of see how those substitution patterns, kind of played out. We saw Luke Kennard then come in for Zachary Riza-Shea, and this team go a bit smaller, but having a lot of shooting ability on the floor through that first quarter. Threes were not falling for anyone on this team except for Trae Young. He was the only one to be able to knock down a three, and it was actually the play in which Trae ended up hitting a three. It was a nice kind of his ability to pass off the ball and then get an open look when the ball came back to him, because he has shooters out there, and guys have to stay on their man. They can't just abandon their man because they're not afraid of the shot like has been in times past. The Rockets did use their size and kind of early on get some points up pretty quickly. Kristaps Porzingis, this is kind of one of those interesting things of knowing that he was only going to play the first half. You did see Kristaps run into some foul trouble where Porzingis had 5 fouls at halftime, and 4 of those, I believe, came like pretty early on, early in like the second quarter. He already had 4. So clearly just feeling things out, kind of, I think because it is preseason, you appreciate and knowing that he was only going to play a half, you appreciate the physicality of figuring things out. As like that'll be a theme through the preseason, obviously, and maybe for some fans it gets a bit annoying. You want this thing to be perfect right out of the gate, but it was kind of interesting to see Porzingis have those early 5 fouls and how he'll manage that in the future, because certainly not something that can happen once the regular season begins, but it is the preseason, and you knew they were only going to play a half. As I think Porzingis played about 15 minutes in this one. Trae Young, like I said, about 18. I think Jalen, I said about 16. The rest of the guys got some more burn in the second half. It was a bit difficult, I think, for guys at times to score, but really kind of once the second quarter began and guys found their shot, the threes for sure started falling much easier than they had in that first quarter. And in fact, I don't have it right up in front of me. I believe they were like 1 for 5 in the first quarter and then 8 for 15 at halftime. So quite a significant change there, as he had Nickeil Alexander-Walker start knocking down some threes. Luke Kennard, Onyeka Okongwu got involved. Is that certainly something that he's continuing to grow about his game, especially when he is going to be playing that 4 that comes with a different role. It comes guarding on defense in a different way, but then offensively, having that ability to stretch the floor is just going to be insane when you literally having Onyeka Okongwu and Kristaps Porzingis on the floor. Every single player can shoot a 3 and can shoot it confidently, and has the defense essentially, they got to keep him honest at that point. And it's certainly it's just it is a dynamic offense to have, and really a positive that I hope that the Hawks are able to explore and exploit other defenses, and that kind of be a big piece that they're able to grow. When it comes to who else kind of played in this one, coming out in the third quarter, you did get what I believe it was Dyson Daniels, Luke Kennard, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Zachary Riza-Shea, and Onyeka Okongwu. They started the third quarter. So then it was interesting to see how Quin Snyder decided to deploy the reserves and the guys who may not be in the rotation, but will get some playing time, especially early on through the preseason and maybe in the early part of the regular season. You saw Keaton Wallace get some time, as he was kind of that first guy outside of the regular 8 guys who we expect to play. Then we saw V. Cresci. Then Nafali Dante entered himself into kind of that lower part of the rotation. Kind of interesting to see his name up above a guy you might expect to get more playing time in Mo Gay. But Mo Gay came in later in the third quarter with Caleb Houston, who is someone trying to make this Hawks roster. We kind of got to see he is very good 3-point shooter that the Hawks, it would be good to have as a part of this bench, especially for just a depth piece. Houston did not shoot the ball particularly well from three last night. I believe it was 1 for 7, if I have it correct on there, which once again, all the stats kind of being wonky. I never really felt super confident whether do I have this right, or are these, just a little bit off. I think the Hawks ultimately, though, they had a hot second quarter shooting the ball, and then outside of that, just not a real ideal 3-point shooting night. But I feel like it was more of getting a feel for the game, for the spacing, for how everyone is playing amongst each other. That I never panic early in the season with how their shots are falling. It's more once we get to late November, early December, if there are still struggles, then that's when you start to get close to wanting to hit that panic button. So Keaton Wallace, outside of the regular 8 playing, Vit Krejci, Nafali Dante. Then we saw Mo Gay, Caleb Houston, Asa Newell, the rookie, made his debut, I guess, of sorts. Doesn't really count until the regular season begins. But he got to suit up and get some playing time midway through the third quarter. You then saw Jacob Toppin to start the fourth, Nico Jurisic midway through the fourth, and then finally those last couple of guys who are going to be, kind of keeping an eye on as to where they stand on the roster. Charles Bassey is a backup center, and then Eli Najai getting some run as well. Those two guys came in with about 3 minutes to play in this game, and so kind of the fringe roster guys that the Hawks can keep around. But if they look out there and see what's available elsewhere in the NBA and they see something more promising, they could potentially make that switch. But I think overall in this game, what we saw was a lot of new, and I think confidence in shooting the ball, even if shots weren't necessarily falling. Trey not needing to be the sole distributor of the basketball and the sole scorer, as I believe Trey finished this game with 9 points and only took 7 shots. So certainly something that, is a positive. I think a negative, certainly the 3-point shooting, kind of an issue that you hope comes along. The more thing, I guess the bigger thing that I have concern about is free throws were not free against the Houston Rockets. It was something that Kristaps Porzingis struggled with, and Nafali Dante was someone else who struggled with. Jalen Johnson, I think, missed his only free throw that he took. It was just kind of like, come on, guys, let's settle in. Now, in the same respect, great to see someone like Dyson Daniels, who had some struggles at the free throw line last year. I believe he was 2 for 2 in this one. And so not everyone was bad from the free throw line. It was just one of those strange things that I feel like every time I turned around, guys were, whether it was Jacob Toppin, I think Nikola Jurisic. No. Jurisic was perfect from the free throw line. Excuse me. But Mo Gay was someone else who missed a free throw. Just kind of felt like it was a little bit all over the place with guys at the free throw line as the Hawks finished this game 18 of 27. So yeah, I mean, it stands out for sure in this one. But hopefully just one of those odd things that, hey, first game, you'll, kind of get back into your rhythm and your routine from the free throw line, and those will be far more automatic. But the Hawks now turn their attention to the Memphis Grizzlies. So a homecoming of sorts for Luke Kennard on Saturday. But before then, the Hawks will have an open practice. They call this the Hawks Fan Fest. That's going to be this Thursday night at 7 p.m. Definitely want to look at Hawks.com to get those. I believe they're $5 tickets. you want to go check this out. It's fun. You get to see the guys do a little bit of scrimmaging, and then the rookies like Ace and Newell, Nikola Zuricic, getting the opportunity to show off their rookie talents. I think Eli Najai will be a part of those rookie duties as well. So just a good time, a fun time. The cheapest ticket that you'll be able to get into State Farm Arena to see these guys in action live in front of you. So definitely something worth checking out. Go ahead, give me a follow on social media at ATL Johnson 18. Follow the radio station at 929 The Game. We'll talk soon, hopefully, about more exciting basketball things that we learn from practices that take place this week, as well as the second preseason game against the Memphis Grizzlies. Go ahead, like, subscribe to the podcast, Atlanta Basketball with Caleb Johnson. Until next time, you guys have a good one.